You finished designing your part, now it's time to think about its final appearance and protection. In this lesson, we're going to dive into additive finishes and how to design around them. So let's get into it. The last step of your design process is making your parts robust so that they can last in the field and look good. So with that, we're going to talk about finishing. Now, the first type of finishing that we're going to get into is additive finishing. Now, what do I mean by that? It essentially just means we're adding something to the part to cover it or coat it that's going to protect it for the long run. Now, with that being said, though, we need to design around that. Now, we're going to get that cosmetic and protection from corrosion, but it's going to be adding things to the part that we're going to need to consider. Now, what do we need to know? The first thing is that that outer layer is going to add and make the ID of our part smaller and the OD, or the outside dimensions of our part, larger. Let's come over here to this diagram to kind of explain that a little bit further. If my part is the black line that's inside of this, the green is going to be the coating that we're putting on it. So I drew this in a top view and a front view, right? So we're looking at it from just a change of orientation. That coating goes all around the part as well, right? So we're increasing it by the coating on our outside dimension here, and our thickness is increasing. So we're seeing that dimensional increase here, but then that coating's on the inside of this large hole, which is making it smaller, right? And that thickness is going to be dictated by the thickness of our finish. Now, we're going to kind of touch on powder coating specifically on this one. And powder coating can be anywhere from 0.004 of an inch all the way up to 0.010 of an inch thick. And you're going to see this variation depending on the type. So if we have a gloss powder coat opposed to a wrinkle powder coat, wrinkle typically is applied much heavier. We're going to see a much thicker coating here. Now think about this though. We talked about in previous lessons, tolerance stack up. From different secondary operations, all the way from the laser, the thickness of the material, we have to consider all of these things in our design. With this being said though, we have that thickness on each side of our part, right? So we're doubling the width of our part by that tolerance that we're adding here, as well as you have to double it for the ID of that hole. So if you have, say, something that's supposed to slip fit into this hole, it's supposed to be a nice tight fit, you need to account for the powder coating, or you're going to end up having to remove the powder coating in order to get it back to that slip fit. Now think about tab and slots as well. So when you have two different parts that are going to be coming together, if they're both powder coated, right, your tab, let's call this our tab right here, our tab is going to end up having that coating all the way around it, and then the slot in which we're cutting it through is going to have powder coating inside of it. So we're going to end up having to add that tolerance for our powder coating 4 times in order to account for it. So just understand that that's going to be in there in the background, and we need to design around it, or you're going to be very disappointed with the form and the fit of your assemblies later on. Now, additionally, we end up having to have a hanging process for the powder coat, and that requires a hole in order for us to put a hook in, or whoever is doing your manufacturing. Now, this hole can be a feature in the part. So say this hole right here, potentially, if it's not too far away, if this is like 2 feet, then this is not going to be a hole that we can use to hang from. But we want a hole near the edge of the part that we can essentially apply a hook from and put it on a rack. One important thing is that if, say, both of these holes had, say, hardware, a stud put on them, these are no longer accessible for us to hang off of. So if you have hardware, we talked about that in previous lessons, pushed in and crimped into these holes, then you need to add a 3rd hole that's just designated for that powder coating process. And so that might affect your cosmetics, and you should be planning ahead for that. Now, when I talk about hardware, we talked about it in that hardware lesson as well. So if you haven't seen that one, go back and watch that one. But thread protection on hardware that's pushed in, that hardware is put in before powder coating process. And so the powder coating actually goes on the outside of it. I have a great example of that right here. We have standoffs inside this green part. You can see the powder coating is on that outside barrel, but on the inside, we applied thread protection. So we put a plug inside of it that allows that powder coating not to go inside, making it so you don't have to chase those threads. For this part right here, we can't use these holes for hanging, but we can use these. So these parts were hung off of these holes here, just like this, and then sprayed from there. Okay, from there, This is a last and final step, essentially, for your manufacturing process. And I say that we're not going to do any bending afterwards. We're going to crack the powder coating. We're not necessarily going to be able to tap a hole on it because you're going to end up removing that powder coating process in that area. However, it can be done. You're also not going to be welding without removing that powder coating process. So this is something you need to think about as the final fit and form of your parts. Now, one thing that is common on this is laser engraving. So you can engrave and remove that powder coating or etch into it to remain having it a protective coating in there, but change that color. Now, this is also for any additive process, whether you're going and getting Krylon from the big box stores or any other coating that you're going to spray on, rubberized coatings, they're always going to add thickness that you need to account for in your designs. The biggest thing here is just understanding how thick that is while you're designing your parts so you can apply that to it. Now, that's it for additive. Now we're going to switch over and we're going to talk about surface finish manipulation, the big one, anodizing, in the next lesson. So we'll see you there.